Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. What a crowd. We appreciate you all coming out this afternoon to see us. So as you know, we're here today to talk about family detention and our recent trip to Dilley, Texas. And in a moment, I'm going to turn the presentation over to these fabulous law students. But before I do so, I want to take just a few minutes to put our presentation today in legal and historical context. Our work in Dilley focused on representing refugees. A refugee is a person who has been persecuted on account of their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion, or a person who has a fear of persecution on one of those 5 protected grounds. Refugees have a right to flee to the United States for safety. Those rights are protected by domestic law as well as international treaty obligations. To pursue an asylum claim, a person must somehow step foot onto U.S. soil. An asylum claim simply cannot be pursued from outside of the United States. For nearly all of U.S. history, asylum seekers were not locked up or detained. We as a people recognized, consistent with domestic law and international treaty obligations, that these trauma survivors are particularly vulnerable, especially women and children seeking asylum. We released these trauma survivors into our communities while they pursued legal status. This long American tradition of treating families seeking asylum with dignity and respect was first interrupted in 2006. That year, the federal government decided to take a medium security prison run by the Corrections Corporation of America, the world's largest for-profit prison corporation, and use it to detain immigrant families. The T. Don Hutto Family Detention Center was located in a very small town north of Austin, Texas. And at first, no one realized what was going on there. The first people on the ground investigating the situation at Hutto was law students from the University of Texas Immigration Clinic, as well as their professor, Barbara Hines. They were shocked by what they saw, and they spread the word about Hutto to everyone they could reach. Among the groups they reached out to was the ACLU. And at the time, I was a legal fellow at the ACLU, just a year out of law school. Barbara Hines urged me and one of my colleagues to come down to Hutto and see the conditions for ourselves, which we did for the first time in January 2007. What we found was shocking. The detainees were asylum seekers from around the world. Christian Iraqis fleeing religious persecution. A Canadian boy, 9 years old, whose parents had been tortured in Iran for having a copy of Salman Rushdie's Satanic Verses. Moms, a few dads, and their infants, toddlers, and young children were all dressed in prison garb. They were subject to counts 8 to 9 times a day. They were locked in small prison cells for most of the day, cells that had open toilets, so no one had privacy, not parents, even when they needed to use the toilet in front of their children. There was no educational opportunities available for the children, no schools at all. The children were not allowed outside of the detention facility for days at a time. The kids were losing weight, and guards threatened to permanently separate kids from their parents for running around and otherwise behaving as children. The desperation that we saw was overwhelming. As word spread about the Hutto facility, moral outrage grew. How could America be treating families and children seeking asylum like this? Extensive litigation, advocacy, and community organizing efforts eventually led to the shutdown of the Hutto facility. In August 2009, the Obama administration closed down Hutto as a family detention center, and it seemed like an ugly chapter of American history was over. But then just 5 years later, starting in June 2014, the Obama administration has been pursuing family detention once more with an aggressiveness that is unprecedented in US history. I want to talk about the numbers. So that first image you see is pictures of kids at Hutto. And before May 2014, from 2009 when Hutto closed to 2014 in May, there was one family detention center in Berks, Pennsylvania, which had 85 beds. It's a converted nursing home, so it has a very different feel than the other detention centers. Then in June 2014, the Obama administration opened up the Artesia Detention Center in New Mexico. It had a bed capacity of about 500. The next detention facility that opened was Carnes. That facility opened in July 2014. It has a bed capacity of 532. Then Artesia closed in December, and a new facility, Dilley, opened in December 2014. Right now, it has a bed capacity of slightly over 400, but by March 2015, it's going to have a bed capacity of 1,200 beds. And by the end of this year, the capacity to detain families will increase exponentially because the bed space at the Carnes facility will increase to 1,000 beds, and the bed space at Dilley will increase to 2,400 beds. And we're not talking about people convicted of any crime here. We're talking about kids and their parents, almost all of whom are simply trying to seek safety in the United States. The Carnes facility is run by a private prison corporation called the Geo Group. The Dilley facility is run by CCA, the Corrections Corporation of America, the same facility that ran Hutto. Now, once more, law students are at the forefront of investigating family detention issues. And this time, the law students are your colleagues from here at Columbia Law School. They have been essential to raising awareness about the Dilley facility and getting people to know about what is going on there. And these 8 students and I were the first legal representatives on the ground at Dilley providing anyone with pro bono representation. And now I'd like to turn the presentation over to all of you. So who wants to take the lead? Why did we go to Dilley?
So we went to Dilley almost by chance. We were intending to work at the Carnes detention facility, which is also located outside of San Antonio. Then shortly before we were scheduled to leave, our partner organization in Texas, Raices, assigned us the cases of 4 families at Dilley, and we were happy to help. But at the time that we went, we didn't realize that we would be the first pro bono legal representatives on the ground. We went in with the goal of representing these 4 families at their bond hearings. At a bond hearing, an immigration judge decides whether a family will be released from detention while they pursue their asylum case, or whether they'll remain in detention. And they also decide how high their bond will be. In determining the bond amount, a judge looks at factors, including whether the women and children are likely to appear for their future immigration hearings, and whether they present a danger to the community or to national security. Our goal was to get our clients released from detention on the lowest bonds possible by demonstrating that our clients had strong asylum cases, close ties to U.S. citizen and permanent resident, family members, and friends, and every incentive to show up for their immigration hearings. We also had to rebut the government attorney's arguments that our clients should not be released from detention on any bond, no matter how high, because they were involved in mass migration and thus posed a threat to national security. And this is a position that the Department of Homeland Security has been taking in every single one of these cases. The bond hearings gave us the opportunity to practice essential lawyering skills, such as drafting affidavits and gathering evidence, preparing our clients to testify and conducting their direct and redirect examinations, and making opening and closing statements before the judge and the government attorney. We felt that this work was also very necessary because these families will have a much better chance of winning their asylum cases if they're able to pursue their claims from outside of detention. So next, we're going to talk about who our clients were.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ariel Littles. My clinic partner was Amy Elmgren. Our client's name was Raquel. Raquel was a strong single mother of 2 young boys who were living and surviving alone in El Salvador. Raquel was forced to flee El Salvador after 3 armed men broke into her home, attacked her, attempted to rape her at gunpoint, and then threatened to kidnap her and her children and kill them. Raquel was forced to flee her home that very night with only what she could carry on her back and her 2 children. Raquel was forced to flee to the capital, where she lived in hiding for over 2 months, not able to go outside, not able to even contact her family for fear of danger that it would put them in and her family in. Raquel traveled the long journey from El Salvador to the United States all alone with her 2 sons. She was forced to carry them on buses, through long walks through jungles and dangerous cities, and eventually she was forced to carry each of them across the river while holding them on her shoulders. Exhausted and alone from her travel, Raquel quickly sought the help of immigration officials, and immediately requested and explained her asylum claim. She was still detained at Dilley and has been there for weeks.
And just so everyone knows, we're using pseudonyms as we discuss our clients.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Teichman. My partner is Bianca Figueroa Santana, and our client was Esperanza, who fled Honduras with her husband and her 9-year-old son, because her 9-year-old son had been ostracized, viciously attacked by his peers at school, members of the public, and members of their own family because of his physical disability. And children in Honduras with physical disabilities don't have a lot of opportunities and have virtually no access to accommodations. So Esperanza left her good job of 6 years. She abandoned her home, and she came with her family here so that her son would not risk physical and psychological persecution in the future. Once they crossed the border, the family was separated. Her husband is now at another detention center, and they're only allowed to speak on rare occasions, so they have the added burden of figuring out how to reunite their family.
Hi everyone, my name is Amy Zhu and my partner is Kat Kim. And our client's name is Angela. And Angela is a young single mother and she had a 4-year-old daughter. She is only 24 years old and she actually has 2 claims. One being domestic abuse and second one is gang persecution. So from a very young age, she was living with her uncle. And her uncle was incredibly abusive, both physically and verbally. He once actually took a hot iron and burned her leg, and she still has scars from that. The second one was that the Mara 18, a vicious gang, was targeting her because she is an incredibly religious woman, and she went to church every week. She also volunteered with the church in all the poor neighborhoods to help the poorest and neediest citizens with their basic necessities. And because of that, the Mara 18 thought that she would be a perfect informant. But to be an informant, not only would she have to spy on on all the citizens in these neighborhoods, she would also serve as a sex slave to the Mara 18. And she did not want to do this. She didn't want to do it for many reasons, but especially because she is incredibly religious. And when the Mara 18 heard her refusal, they said, if you do not do this, we will kill your daughter, we will dismember her, and we will send her body back to you in a black trash bag. Understandably, she was terrified and fled immediately in order to save her daughter's life.
Hi everyone, my name is Solomon Kim and my partner was Nicole Gonzalez. And our client was a 29-year-old single mother with a 5-year-old child from Honduras. And she fled to the United States for 2 reasons. The first was she had her child's biological father was imprisoned in 2010 for raping her nephew. And when she decided not to bring her son to visit him in the prison any longer, he said that he would threaten to kill her, and he repeatedly threatened this to her on several occasions. At one point, she asked him, "Why are you doing this?" He said, "Well, after I've been in prison, I don't have a heart, I don't have God in my heart, and I will do whatever it takes to kill you." The second reason is that she had a partner, an ex-partner, whom she stopped seeing in June of 2014, and once that relationship ended, the partner would come to her house every single weekend for several months straight and continue to rape her. He also, at that point, threatened to kill her and her son if she did not get back together with him. So in a matter of only a few days after these threats did not stop in December, she packed up her things. On December 19th, which was a Friday, she left, took a 5-day journey, and actually crossed into the United States and on Christmas Eve. So as you heard all the stories that we've just shared with our clients, one of the most important lessons that we've learned is that these people who come to the United States are doing so not because they want to, but because they have to. It's not out of choice, but out of fear. And those are some of the things that are not easily recognizable when you're just simply hearing or listening about these stories through media or through other forms, and something that was very striking when we met our clients.
So now we want to transition and tell you a little bit about what we actually did when we were on the ground in Dilley. And I wanted to start by telling you about what a typical day was like in Dilley. And the funny thing is there really wasn't much of a typical day. I think the one unifying factor was that there was some unexpected issue that arose every single day that we could not possibly plan for. Before we even left for Dilley, we were denied every attempt to have legal calls with our clients. So this meant that we weren't able to hear their stories, and we couldn't do any meaningful work for them before we actually got to Texas. And this was coupled with the fact that before we arrived in Dilley, we found out that our clients' bond hearings were scheduled consecutively from Tuesday to Friday that we would be there. So that meant that if we arrived on Monday, some of us would have to walk into court on the next day to represent clients that we met only the day before. So we actually filed some motions to push those hearings back, but they were denied. So we did actually represent them in court the next day after meeting them. Every day, a group of us traveled the hour from San Antonio to Dilley, where we were staying in San Antonio. And once we arrived, we had to leave our laptops, our phones, all of our personal belongings in the car because you couldn't bring those into the detention center. And what that meant, we only brought notebooks and pens in with us. What that meant is every single time we had to make a phone call, which was quite often since a lot of our job was to contact the client's contacts and friends. And every single time we had to edit a document, we had to leave the detention center, get in our cars, and start working. So we often spent hours working out of our cars parked in the detention center parking lot using mobile hotspots for internet. And every day that we went through the security process, it could take up to 20 minutes. And so every time we came out, we had to restart that process again. And once we were inside, we waited for the officers to find our clients, which could take 10 minutes, it could take an hour. So we were constantly dealing with the ticking clock and how much time we would actually have to work with our clients. The facility has a few private rooms meant for attorney-client and family visits, but those often filled up. There were only a few of them, so we would end up meeting with our clients in the middle of the visitation area at a table that wasn't necessarily private. But if our hearing was the next day, we made sure to spend quite a lot of time with our clients. We wanted to make sure that we got to moot them because they would be asked a series of really quick, grilling, difficult questions by the judge. So we wanted to prepare them for that experience. Throughout this whole process, some of us spent 12 hours a day at the detention center every day. But after all of those hours at the detention center, each evening, and this was every single evening since we had hearings every day, it was time to race back the hour to San Antonio and start our printing and filing operation. We didn't have any place in Dilley to actually print. We brought a printer with us. We kept it in the trunk of our car. We didn't have a place to plug it in. and we toyed with the idea of going to the local gas station Subway and finding an outlet and printing there, but that didn't work out. So we also found the FedEx with the absolute latest pickup time, which was an hour and 20 minutes from the facility. So literally every night, some of us raced in a car and ran into a FedEx to try to make sure that our filings got on the plane to get to the judge by 8:30 the next morning. So it's safe to say that this operation took the teamwork of the entire clinic, including some students back in New York, who provided us with some emergency services when we needed it. So we printed, signed, tabbed, hole punched, scanned things, and remember the immigration court only accepts paper filings by mail. So every single day we encountered a mini crisis, whether it was the printer that we had running low on ink, so we actually were not sure how we would get these documents printed, or it was our client sponsor sending us documents at the last minute that needed to be translated because we can't submit Spanish language documents to the court, or the hotel internet just refused to cooperate. And I think it's really important to discuss these difficulties of actually trying to file the documents, because it's an experience that most of us who will go to law firms or larger organizations probably won't have to deal with. But it underscores how difficult it is for lawyers and law students, even those with really great resources, to represent clients in a remote location like Dilley, and without the infrastructure that we typically rely on.
So just to emphasize how difficult Dilley filing and all of our court filings were, the court is actually not in Dilley. The court is actually in Denver, Colorado. So we were FedExing things as quickly as we can to a judge who would video conference in to the trials every morning. So if it wasn't enough that we had very short deadlines and we weren't given any opportunity to extend, the judge was not even physically present at any of our trials. As Nicole just discussed, the remoteness of the facility makes access to counsel for residents and access to counsel to the facility nearly impossible. I will discuss two matters. One, the lack of counsel that had access to the facilities, and two, the lack of legal information for the residents and even us and their attorneys. I would first like to establish that over the 5 days that we were at Dilley, there were virtually no other lawyers, not pro bono students, not lawyers for hire, no one. Of the few lawyers that we did see, they were primarily lawyers for hire, and we learned that they were charging exorbitant, up in the thousands of dollars for each time they would come to court. Those lawyers often had little contact with their clients and oftentimes did not even speak their language or know their names on occasion. In the 5 days that we were available for our clients in Dilley, our team met with dozens of other women. Upwards of 40 additional women a day, just the 8 of us. We also took on 7 more clients just in people coming to talk to us. Every day, once we had concluded our client meetings, there would be a line of women waiting in the visitation room to speak with us for even a minute. Whether this was to ask for a question about their case or just to read a document that was not translated to Spanish, these poor women sometimes would wait hours to speak with any of us. The need was so bad that the guards at the facility themselves were helping us facilitate various conversations and dialogue with the residents. Whether this was taking notes on why each person was waiting or to speak to us, or even translating conversations and questions to us. The issues concerning language at Dilley is a huge problem. Not only are the residents often unable to speak to some of the guards who don't speak Spanish, for those who do not speak Spanish, as we had people from Brazil, Haiti, all of these other countries, not to mention people who spoke indigenous languages, there was no one for them to speak to and no one who could translate. No language lines, no way for them to speak, leaving them completely isolated. While the court provided interpreters during the trial for each of the clients, the court neglected to have the entire trial interpreted to the residents. Instead, the court only had the translator translate the basic information to the resident to ensure that they would know their next date and what the next date was for. But they wouldn't tell them what they needed to bring, what it actually entailed, what the next steps were. Literally, they would explain, you need to be here at this date, and this is what it's for. Not even explaining what a master calendar hearing or just what each of these hearings were actually for. To truly understand the extent of the need for the women, I'd like to share a short anecdote on our time in the courtroom. On the day that me and my partner went with Raquel, we were brought into a waiting room where over 20 women and their children had their children on their laps, were sitting due that day in court. We were the only lawyers present in that room. Not only were there no other lawyers present, but the guards leading us into the room attempted to separate us from our client and from the other women so that they couldn't talk to us. We tried, this was a case that we saw and every time that we went to the court. So every day, upwards of 20 to 40 people were sitting there, about to go to court with no advice, no access to counsel, and no one to speak to about what they were about to enter into.
Hi everyone, I'm Kat Kim, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the issues with detainees having to represent themselves pro se in bond hearings and asylum hearings, and basically every legal procedure they went through at Dilley. And there are two facets to this problem. The first is that when we left on January 30th, there were 408 women and children, asylum seekers, detained in Dilley. We were the only pro bono attorneys and law students who had been there. When we left, there was no one to help these women and children. Private attorneys charge a minimum of $1,500 just for the bond hearing. And remember that the detainees are refugees who came here with the clothing on their back. Many of them have family and friends in the United States, but the family and friends tell them, we can pay for an attorney for the bond hearing, or we can pay the money for the bond once the bond is set. It's up to you. There's no way we can pay for both facets of this. And so the option is then, do I pay an attorney and maybe they'll help me in my bond hearing, but then I won't be able to pay bond? Or do I represent myself pro se, get a high bond, and maybe not be able to pay that anyway because the bond is so high? And so what's going on is that there's also very little information and access about what a bond hearing is. A lot of the women have bond hearings and they don't know what it is, what the legal issues are, the arguments that they need to make, or how to submit papers to court. As Ariel mentioned, the court sits in Denver, and so the documents have to be mailed or faxed, but there was very inconsistent information given to the woman about how to submit their court filings. Additionally, all information submitted to the court must be in English, and so multiple women would come up to us while we were there and ask us for help filling out the papers because they don't understand English, and no one is there to assist them with their filings. And so this is bad enough that women have to go forward pro se without any of support or resources. But the flip side to this problem is that the Denver Immigration Court doesn't seem to know about the lack of counsel available in Dilley and how expensive private attorneys are. We have received reports from multiple clients that we've kept in touch with, people we were doing limited representation for. We were preparing filings for them, who said, you submitted the filing for us, thank you, and we went to our court date, but the judge refused to hear me. The judge didn't allow me to proceed on my own behalf. The judge ordered me to find an attorney. I said I couldn't find one. I said I couldn't afford one, but the judge wouldn't let me go forward and continued my case for 2 to 3 weeks. Now, I've just explained why it's so difficult to go forward pro se, but the flip side is, when the court orders you to find a lawyer, that means you spend another 2 to 3 weeks in detention on a fool's errand because there are no pro bono counsel yet, and the families don't have money for an attorney. So there are women who are in the position where they would rather go forward and have the bond set, but the judge is saying, no, you need to get a lawyer, and without understanding that there are no pro bono counsel and that lawyers are so expensive. And so women and children who are babies, children who are toddlers, teenagers, they have to stay longer in immigration prison. The women and children there are desperate for help. They want people to help them fill out the forms because everything needs to be submitted in English. They ask for help contacting their family members because having a letter of support from your family or friends is an essential piece of the bond packet. And making phone calls out of the prison facility to your family and friends is very expensive. I remind you that Dilley is run by a for-profit institution, and so to do anything like contact your family to see if they can get a lawyer, see if they can help find money for bond, you need to pay for that. And finally, what they're most desperate for is attorney representation. They're desperate for people to come and help them.
All right, so one of my responsibilities at Dilley was to prepare the women for their credible fear interviews, which we call CFIs. And credible fear interviews are exactly what they sound like. They're interviews by asylum officers to determine whether these women have a credible fear of going back to their home country. And when I got there, I was supposed to help 30 women with their CFIs. However, 28 of them had already had their CFIs, and I could do nothing. That's a big problem because when I asked them if they knew what the CFI was before they took it or what they said, most of them had no idea what it was and didn't know what the consequences were for failing. If you fail the CFI, you are able to be deported very, very quickly. And none of them knew this. They barely knew what a CFI was. And also, because they didn't know how to respond to a lot of questions or even what the questions were asking for, a lot of them omitted a lot of information that is crucial for their asylum claims, and also to show that they do have a credible fear. For example, many of them did not talk about their domestic abuse issues. This was probably because when you're talking to a person you've never met and they're acting not as warm, friendly as you'd like, you're probably not going to share the most horrifying moments of your life. And they also would ask many insensitive questions, for example, about sexual abuse. And many women would either not answer those questions or omit the parts of their answers, and therefore that weakened their claim a great deal. Another problem I saw was that many of these women had abusive partners who would rape them, but they didn't know that marital rape or rape by an intimate partner was still rape. And so that was also omitted from their CFI. And so the fact that there was no one there to prepare them, to tell them a little bit about what the CFI was, just so they could answer the questions more thoroughly or just give more information, was a huge problem for these women. And many of these women were told, you don't have a very strong claim, or actually failed their CFI, not because they didn't have a strong claim, but simply because they didn't share enough information.
Another issue that we saw at Dilley was the fact that these women are treated like prisoners or are kept in prison-like conditions. And this is really a problem for two reasons. The first is that these women and children are bona fide asylum seekers, so they're not criminals. Also, under American law, immigration cases such as these are a civil matter, so legally speaking, they're not criminals either. And the prison conditions begin essentially as soon as the women and children cross the border. So all but one of our clients crossed the Mexican-U.S. border, excuse me, by forging the Rio Grande River, which forms a natural border with Mexico. And after they cross the river, they essentially encounter Border Patrol, and Border Patrol will pick them up, will put them in trucks, typically take their information, and then they'll be transported to Border Patrol stations that are called hileras. And the hileras look like this essentially. They're concrete cells, and the migrants are divided by gender and age. And then they're kept in these cells. They have, as Alora was describing before, one bathroom or one toilet, and they have to cover each other if they want privacy. They don't have mattresses or pillows. They sleep on the concrete floor, and they have these aluminum blankets. One of our clients told us that she was fed water, an apple, and a tortilla with rice, and that's all every single day. And most people, or some people, at least nowadays, are only kept there for a few days. But one of our clients was kept in the hileras for 3 weeks. And the reason that they're called hileras, which is like a freezer or a cooler in Spanish, is because they're kept at extremely and uncomfortably low temperatures. So after they leave the hileras, they go to what the migrants have dubbed perreras, which means doghouse. And the reason for this is because they look and feel like dog houses. So this is a picture, and it's basically a warehouse, and then they subdivide the space in the warehouse by these fences, and then they again divide the migrants up by gender and by age. And one of our clients was there for about a week, and other clients were there for several days to a week. And one thing that our client really said she hated was the fact that there were no windows. So for the whole time she was there, she had no idea whether it was night or day, and that was very disorienting.
Right, and so after they experience the hilera and the perrera, then they're transferred to the Dilley Center. And once upon arrival, they're stripped of most of their personal items. These women and children come here with next to nothing, so the things that they do bring with them are held very close to their hearts. It's the one thing that they have. They're stripped of all their jewelry, even their wedding rings and their rosaries. So 2 important pieces of jewelry that are taken away from them once they come here. They live in cabins. Each cabin, each housing unit is assigned 4 families, so 4 mothers and their children. Temperature regulation is a problem in these cabins. It doesn't appear to have heating or cooling units attached to them, and all of our clients complain that they are always cold in these cabins. Then there are 3 specified meal times where they have to eat. The food is of terrible quality. Many of the children are not eating. They go to bed hungry at night because the food is so bad. There's commissary, just like prison. Again, these detainees arrive with next to nothing, and they're expected to make phone calls to outside parties to not only seek counsel, but to also ask for money so that they can make phone calls in general and purchase things that they may want to at the commissary store. There's continued supervision. When we went down there, even we had to be escorted to all points of entering the facility. They also have to be escorted to us, to and from our meetings, all of us together to and from the courthouse. We always had to wait on a guard to bring us to and from different areas of the center. And finally, they have check-in times to be counted because these are criminals, right? Wrong. These are not criminals, and yet they have to be there at their cabins at 3 specific times in the morning, noon, and night to be counted to make sure no one has escaped. And they're also reprimanded if they are not at their counting times, if they were even at meetings with us. They needed to then have a note that said they were in a legal meeting. So.
And one thing that's important to mention is that when they come over the border initially, they are given a CFI screening, so the credible fear screening. And many of our clients said that they were not asked these questions in Spanish or in their native language. They have no idea what they're asked. And they're also asked to sign a document that is a voluntary deportation paper, but this is not explained to them. And those who do know what it is will often refuse to sign, and they have told us that guards will laugh in their face and tell them you're going to be deported anyway, so it doesn't matter whether you sign or not.
So another concern at Dilley is the lack of access to quality medical care. Women and children at Dilley did have access to doctors, nurses, and psychologists, but the medical staff at the facilities seemed to lack the resources and training to provide quality medical care. For example, one of the women we met with was very distressed because her 3-year-old daughter had been sick for 5 days with a fever of about 102 degrees. She was especially worried because her daughter had suffered a seizure 4 months earlier due to a similar high fever. This woman told us that she had taken her daughter to the medical unit every day to see the doctor, multiple times per day. But the doctor there only gave her ibuprofen and water and told her that antibiotics were not available. The doctor didn't ask about her daughter's medical history and didn't seem concerned about the severity of her illness or the risks that are associated with the high fever. Luckily, this woman's daughter was feeling better by the time we left, but this incident made us very concerned about the quality of medical care at the facility.
And related to medical issues, one other thing that was a problem was lack of accommodations for those who needed them. So as Nicole mentioned, she and I had a client whose son had a physical disability, which made it very difficult for him to accomplish daily tasks, including eating, using the bathroom, sleeping alone, or even sitting down in a chair. And for the first month that they were there, they didn't receive any accommodations except a bed rail, which when the family was moved to a different sleeping quarters was not replaced. So they no longer have one. And only when we, as their attorneys, started pushing for accommodations did they receive any. And when we left, they hadn't received everything. And again, as I said, this took at least a month.
So my colleagues did a really good job of recounting all the problems that we did face when we were at Dilley, but one of the biggest problems is that we just don't know enough, or we weren't able to experience enough when we're actually at the facility. So going back to this slide, you'll see that the center is actually made up of these sort of cabins that are all separated because they're still under construction. And so beyond the visitation center, the courtroom, and the security checkpoint, we had absolutely no way to view or actually visit any of the other centers. So there's a lot of things that we don't know what goes on in these other places. For example, we don't know the daily schedules of these detainees. We don't know their religious practices, whether there are any activities, whether there's recreational activities. We don't know exactly what their access to the library or internet is. We've had conflicting reports of people saying, I have my bond application ready. I'm ready to send this out, but I don't know how to send it out. And so there were conflicting reports on that. We also didn't know, for example, Amy talked about a little bit about this, the exact quality of medical care. When we first arrived, Nicole and our client was detained in the medical unit for several hours, but we couldn't even contact the medical unit because the phone system wasn't set up for us, allow us to do so. We also don't know exactly the qualification of the employees. The employees are actually, a lot of them stay 30 minutes away from this detention center, and they come in shifts. There's a bus that actually takes them and comes in shifts. And we saw a countless number of shifts and new faces every single time we went to the detention center. So we just don't know exactly who the people work there and what their qualifications are.
So as I'm sure you guys have gathered, there are a lot of problems with family detention. And our work did not stop when we left Dilley, where our work is ongoing. So I'm going to talk a bit about what we're doing now, and then Nicole will talk about what you all and what we all can do to help the bond situation and to help the refugees, and what we can do to just fix the situation and work toward ending family detention and closing this blot on American history. So what we're doing, as Elora mentioned, we went to Dilley with 4 clients for bond hearings. While we were there, we picked up new clients for bond hearings because women would come to us and say, my cabin mate, my friend, she has her hearing tomorrow and she's desperate. Is there anything you can do? And we could not say no. How do you look someone in the eye and tell them, I'm sorry, I will not help you? So we picked up new clients, and actually we are continuing to do that. Just yesterday, members of the Immigrant Rights Clinics agreed to represent 2 new clients in their bond hearings. We also are continuing to pick up clients in limited representation, where we prepare their filings, interview their sponsors, and prepare the sponsor filings, and submit all the documents to court, and interview the women and moot them and prepare them for proceeding pro se in their bond hearings. We also continue to track larger issues of concern. We interview our clients about what the ongoing issues are on the systemic level, with the goal of assembling a lot more information and filling in the gaps, and then using this to raise awareness among immigration advocates and among the legal community so that people know what's going on. The goal is to end family detention. We left and there were 408 women and children. But when the facility is fully functional, there will be 2,400 asylum seekers in desperate need of counsel, and this needs to end. And so Nicole is going to talk about what we can do to help and solve this problem.
So after our hearings, we were honestly really shocked by the high bonds that our clients got. It affected us emotionally in ways that we didn't really expect. And we knew that we could not go back to New York and leave our clients and hundreds of other families alone to fend for themselves in trying to actually pay the bonds. We had heard some stories. We heard at least one story of a woman who got a bond set at $15,000, and she attempted to hang herself because she knew that she had no chance of being able to pay the bond. So we had heard that other bond funds had been set up for other detention centers, but we hadn't heard of anyone existing for Dilley. So before we even left San Antonio, we decided to set up a fund. And we are really proud to say that we're now an incorporated nonprofit, and we're in the process of seeking 501c3 status because we really want to keep this going as a long-term project. So a lot of you have heard about this already, but we really can't do this without everyone's help. So we invite you to please visit our website, our funding page. We already raised over $11,000. But if that's too much of a hassle, we also invite you to take out your phones. You can take them out right now if you feel compelled about what you heard today. And if you use Venmo, you can Venmo a contribution directly to our fund. So, and if you don't know how to use Venmo, you can also ask someone else and hopefully get the app, and that would make things really, really easy. So, and we all know the importance of social media and advocacy campaigns. So once again, if you are sitting here listening to us and you're wondering how you can help, sharing this on Facebook, tweeting about it, if you have other suggestions for us, we are open and we want to keep this going as much as we can.
So we've shared a lot of information with you all today, but we'd like to open the floor for any questions that you guys might have.
So yes, we are working on plans to go back to Dilley, and I am working with immigrants' rights advocates across the country to set up a concerted pro bono infrastructure so that law students and lawyers who care can go in and out of the facility on a regular basis and provide representation. So if you're interested in getting involved, if you're interested in getting on the ground, or if you're interested in helping remotely, please let us know. Joshua Morris, one of the clinic administrators, is beginning to compile information about students who are interested, so please email him.
Any other questions? Your mic. Your mic. You can speak.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Ariel again. Our first steps right now is as soon as we got back, we compiled a very detailed report that, because our first steps weren't just closing it. Okay.
We're in the process of talking with immigrants' rights advocates across the country to figure out a strategy for ending it.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, is there?
So in the interest of time, can I say that I will send you a long report to answer that question, and I want to turn it over to Ariel to talk about the raffle. Is that okay? Thank you.
So, okay. So first, we'd like to thank Student Senate, who generously offered to give the proceeds of the candy grams that they're selling out there to our fund. So, I mean, that just means the world to us, and thank you so much to the Senate. Please buy candy grams. They're fun and helpful. Also, as you can see above, as you've heard today, our fund is going to help as many people as possible escape the suffering of detention and continue their journey to asylum with the support of their family and their friends, and with the ability to actually access counsel outside this detention center. We reached out to others as with our bond fund. And we are actually privileged to gain the support of some retailers who have donated items like above for a raffle. So the raffle will include Swarovski items, L'Occitane, and more. And we will be selling the raffle tickets for $5 next week. And we will take the drawing of the raffle on Friday. So we'll have gift baskets and things, and all of the proceeds of the raffle, everything will be going to the fund and getting as many of these women and children out as quickly as possible. So please donate via Venmo. Please participate in the raffle. They're great things, I promise. And please continue to look out for updates and information. And if you're interested or willing to help, please reach out to us, the IRC. Any of us, if you know any of us, you can just come talk to us, email Laura, because we really do want to continue this effort, and it's really important.